Hello. You are listening to the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast. We are here to walk with parents on their unwanted journey of child loss, guiding them to a place of hope, light, and purpose, not in spite of their child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. And now, here is your host, author, speaker, and bereaved parent, Diehl.
Hi, as always, thank you for joining me today. Recently, I had something happen that caught me completely off guard. I ran into someone I hadn't seen in several years. We visited for a few minutes, and then she looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "Laura, you look wonderful. You look 10 years younger, and there's a sparkle in your eyes." I smiled and I thanked her, but after we went our separate ways, I found myself thinking about those words for quite a while. It wasn't because she thought I looked younger. It wasn't even because she noticed a sparkle in my eyes. It was because there was a time when I honestly believed that no one would be able to say something like that to me again. There was a season after Becca died when my face reflected nothing but grief. My eyes reflected grief. My voice reflected grief. My entire life reflected the heaviness of grief. If someone had asked me back then what my future looked like, I honestly don't know that I could have answered them. I really wasn't looking toward the future much. I was just trying to survive one day at a time. And I know many of you understand exactly what I mean. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe getting out of bed takes every ounce of strength you have. Maybe you're going through the motions because you have to, but inside you feel completely empty. I remember just feeling like an empty shell of a person and just thinking, how am I going to live like this the rest of my life, just feeling like I'm in an empty shell waiting to die. Maybe you've begun wondering if this crushing heaviness is simply what the rest of your life will be like. If that's where you are, first of all, I want you to know there is no judgment from me. I have been there. I know what it's like to wonder if you will ever feel alive again, even if you want to, right? I know what it's like to think, this is just who I am now. This is how I'll always feel, how I'll always be. As I reflected on what my friend said, I realized something. That sparkle that she noticed didn't happen overnight. There wasn't one particular day where I just woke up and suddenly felt like myself again. In fact, I don't think there was ever a moment when I could say, that's the day everything changed. Instead, God has been quietly, patiently working in my life for years. So quietly, in fact, I didn't even realize how much he had been doing until someone else noticed it and called my attention to it. And that got me thinking, how does God do that? How does someone go from believing they will never really live life fully again to having someone notice there's life in their eyes? I think the answer begins with understanding something about the place where so many bereavers find themselves. I've often described child loss as being thrown into a place of suffocating darkness, and I still think that's one of the best ways I know to describe it. But another picture that comes to mind over the years is that of being thrown into a deep pit. Not a pit that we choose, not a pit we deserved, not even a pit we saw coming. One moment we're walking through life, and the next moment everything changes. The life we knew is gone. The dreams we had for our family are gone. The future we imagined is gone. Even the person we used to be seems to have disappeared. It's no wonder we feel trapped. And here's what I have come to believe. The enemy doesn't just want us to experience the pain of losing our child. As horrible as that is, he wants something even more. He wants to totally and permanently debilitate us. He wants us to believe that this pit, this place of suffocating darkness, this pit has become our permanent home for the rest of our time here on earth. Jesus told us in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, I don't think that's limited to the moment our child dies. The enemy wants to keep stealing. He wants to steal our hope. He wants to steal our peace and keep it from ever coming back to us. He wants to steal our purpose. He wants to steal the confidence that God still has a plan for our lives. This did not blindside God. There is more for us, as much as that's hard for us to receive. The enemy's whispers are subtle, but they are powerful. Your life is over. You'll never laugh again. You'll never have purpose again. No one understands. God has forgotten you. Have you noticed that every one of those thoughts, it sounds and it feels so final? They leave no room for hope, no room for healing, no room for any of our tomorrows to ever be good again. But they also have something else in common. Not one of them comes from the heart of God. Now, before I go any further, I want to make something very clear, because I never want a grieving parent to misunderstand what I'm saying. When I'm talking about God leading us out of that pit, I am not talking about getting over our child. I don't like that phrase, because I don't believe we ever get over the death of our son or daughter. I'm not talking about forgetting them, like they're behind and like this never happened. I'm not talking about loving them less. I'm not talking about pretending that everything's okay, and I'm certainly not talking about moving on. Our children will always be part of who we are. We will always love them. We will always miss them. There will always be moments when something catches us off guard and we wish with everything in us that they were still here. Healing doesn't erase any of that. When I talk about healing, I'm talking about getting to a point where we can function again, and then getting to a point where life has meaning and purpose again, but not something healing like it never happened. Hope doesn't erase any of those things of missing our child, loving our child. In fact, I think one of the biggest fears that we have as bereaved parents is that if we begin to heal, somehow we are leaving our child behind. And maybe you've felt that. Maybe you've caught yourself laughing with a friend and then immediately felt guilty. Maybe you started looking forward to something and thought, should I even be excited about this? Maybe you found yourself smiling at a child you see somewhere or enjoying a family gathering, and then wondered if your child would somehow think you've forgotten them. Can I gently tell you something that I have had to learn myself? Those thoughts do not come from God's heart either. Our love for our children is not measured by how deeply we stay buried in pain and sorrow and despair. The depth of our grief is not what proves the depth of our love. It's not our pain that keeps us attached to our child. It's our love for them that will never, ever go away. And our love goes with us wherever we go. I still love Becca every bit as much as I did the day she was born. I loved her every bit as much the day she left this earth, and I love her every bit as much today, right now. That has never changed. But what God has been changing is not my love for my daughter. He's been changing my understanding of what it means to keep living while I wait to see her again. And I think that's where the journey out of the pit really begins. So if God doesn't intend for us to stay in that pit forever, how does He actually lead us out? I don't think it's nearly as dramatic as we sometimes imagine. We all love hearing stories where someone says, God touched me, and from that day forward, everything changed. I never touched a cigarette again, or I never swore again. And certainly God can work that way. I have a friend that happened to, but I don't think that's how He usually works in the lives of bereavers. Most of us do not wake up one morning and just suddenly feel whole again. We don't suddenly stop missing our child, and we don't suddenly understand why they had to die. Instead, I believe God works much more quietly than that. He walks with us. He strengthens us. He gently begins changing the way we think. He reminds us of His faithfulness. He gives us just enough strength for today, and then He does the same thing again tomorrow. As a matter of fact, I was talking with a friend about that today. He gives us the strength we need for this day. A lot of times we want strength for what's coming in the future, and He's already there. He's already in the future. We don't have to concern ourselves with that. We just need the strength for today, right? And that's what He gives us. Before we even realize it, we've taken another step. Then another. Not because we've somehow become strong enough to climb out of the pit ourselves, but because He has faithfully walked beside us every step of the way. I love Psalm 23. And I know we hear it so often that a lot of times we don't really stop to think about what those words are saying and what they mean. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. You know, and when Becca died, I feel like it's more than just a shadow of death, right? But have you ever noticed that David didn't say God removed the valley? He didn't say God even explained why the valley was there. He didn't say God carried him around it. He simply said, You are with me. I think as grieving parents, we naturally want God to remove that valley. We want Him to take away the pain. We want Him to answer all of our questions. We want Him to tell us why our child died and why He didn't stop it. And those are honest questions. And I really don't think God is offended by them because I've asked them myself. Over the years, though, I've realized something. While God hasn't answered all of my why questions, He has answered a much deeper question. Actually, two questions. One of them is how. How are You going to get me through this? How are You going to make me want to live again without my daughter here? And the other question underneath all of the others is, God, will You stay with me through this? I don't know how to get through this without Him. I really don't. And His answer has always been yes. Now, that does not mean that I've always felt His presence. There were seasons when heaven seemed painfully quiet. There were days when I prayed because I knew I needed to, not because I felt anything happening. There were mornings when I opened my Bible just because I knew it was where I needed to be, even though my heart felt numb. And looking back now, I can see something I could not see then. Even when I couldn't feel Him, He never stopped walking with me. Joseph's life in the Bible reminds me of that. We often summarize his story by saying he went from the pit to the palace, but we forget everything that happened in between. He wasn't rescued the same day his brothers threw him into the pit. He was sold as a slave. He was falsely accused and spent years in prison for something he did not do. As a matter of fact, someone lied. He was a man of integrity, and the lie was believed, and he was thrown in prison. If anyone had a reason to believe God had forgotten him, it was Joseph. But over and over again, Scripture tells us the Lord was with Joseph. I love that because it reminds me that God's presence is not dependent on my circumstances. The Lord was with Joseph in the pit. He was with him as a slave. He was with him in prison. Long before God changed Joseph's circumstances, He had already given Joseph the greatest gift He could give, and that was Himself, His presence. He was with him. And I think that's something we sometimes miss. We can get so focused on asking God to change our circumstances or to take away our pain that we overlook the fact that He has promised never to leave us. His presence doesn't remove our grief. I mean, yeah, I wish it did, but it does give us the strength to keep taking the next step, the next breath. Sometimes that's all we need for that day. Not answers, but just enough grace for one more step. As I was thinking about all of this, another verse came to mind, and it's Psalm 40, verse 2, where David says, "He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along." I love that verse because David doesn't say God instantly made everything wonderful again. He says God lifted him out of the pit and then God steadied him as he walked. I don't know about you, but that's how my own journey has felt. There wasn't one dramatic moment when all of my grief disappeared. There wasn't like one prayer that suddenly made everything make sense. Instead, God has faithfully steadied me over the years. Sometimes that meant giving me enough strength to make it through one more day, maybe one more hour or the next minute. Sometimes it meant bringing just the right person into my life at just the right time. Sometimes it meant reminding me of a promise in His Word that I've read so many times before, but I suddenly saw it in a brand new way that I needed. Looking back now, I can see His fingerprints were all over my journey, even during the seasons when I could not see what He was doing. At the time, it often felt like nothing was changing, nothing was happening. But God was changing me very slowly, very gently, very patiently. You know, we often pray for God to change our circumstances, and I understand why. I still wish Becca were here. I still wish our family gatherings were different. I wish cancer had never entered our lives. If I could choose, I would choose to have my daughter back in a heartbeat. But since that is not the reality I get to live in, I've discovered something else that God has been doing. He's been teaching me that even though He did not remove this valley from my life, He's never stopped walking through it with me. And because He has been faithful every step of the way, I've slowly become someone who trusts Him even more deeply than I ever have before. Now, that doesn't mean I have fewer questions. It doesn't mean I understand everything, not even close. It just simply means I've learned that I don't have to understand everything in my head to know that God is still good. And that's why the conversation I had recently with my friend meant so much to me. As I mentioned at the beginning, she looked at me and said, "Laura, you look wonderful. You look 10 years younger. There's a sparkle in your eyes." And really, those words stayed with me for days. Like I said, not because she thought I looked younger, but because she saw a sparkle. She saw life in me. And that's something I really didn't think would ever happen again. Like I said, my face reflected grief for years. My eyes reflected grief. My voice reflected grief. Everything in me reflected grief. I look at pictures and I see the heaviness of grief all over me. My eyes are glazed. And I mean, we're talking years. And I honestly thought that's who I would be for the rest of my life. Even though I'm helping other parents, I just felt like I would never get to the point where there was just life in me to the point where people could see it reflected in my eyes. But somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, God had been quietly doing what Psalm 40 describes. He had been steadying me as I walked, just one step at a time. He didn't erase my grief. He didn't erase my love for Becca. He didn't erase the longing I still have to see her again. What He did was something so much deeper. He began replacing hopelessness with hope. He began replacing despair with quiet confidence that He really is who He says He is. Death is part of life. Unless we're here when Jesus returns, we're all going to die. And I know that we feel like it was out of order, that our child should not have left this earth before us, but it happened. And He began reminding me that while death changed my relationship with Becca for now, it did not end my relationship with her. One day I will see her again. And until that day comes, I want my life to reflect the faithfulness of God who has carried me through every step of this journey. And I think that's what my friend noticed. She wasn't seeing someone who no longer grieves. She was seeing someone whose grief was no longer the only thing reflected in her life. That doesn't mean the grief is gone. I've said that several times. But it means that God's faithfulness has become visible through me. I wonder if that's what God wants for every one of us. Not that we stop missing our children, not that we pretend we're okay, not that we somehow move on, but that over time, as He faithfully walks with us, our lives become a testimony not only to the depth of our love for our child, but also to the depth of God's faithfulness in carrying us through the impossible. If you're listening today and you are still in that deep pit, I don't want you to hear my story as pressure. I don't want you to think, well, Laura got there, but I never will. Instead, I hope you hear it as an invitation to trust the one who has been walking beside you, even if you haven't been able to feel Him. Maybe today all you can do is whisper, Jesus, help me. If that's your prayer, then pray it. Maybe today, all you can do is believe that maybe the pit isn't your permanent home, even though you can't imagine what life outside of it could possibly look like. If that's where you are, that's enough for today. God is not asking you to climb out by yourself. He's simply asking you to take His hand, one step, one day, one breath at a time. I want to share with you where I will be speaking the next couple of months in case you want to find out more and you can attend the event. I would love to be able to see you at one of these. July 23rd through the 26th, that's coming up in just a few weeks, obviously. I am teaching some workshops and I will be singing at a couple of the main sessions for BP USA. If you've never heard of BP, it's Bereaved Parents USA. It's a national organization and their yearly gathering is in Pittsburgh this year. August 14th through 16th, I will be a keynote speaker and doing a workshop for Umbrella Ministries. Now, that is a ministry to bereaved moms. It is Christ-centered, and that will be in Colorado Springs. October 16th through the 18th, I want to encourage you to consider joining us for a relaxing and meaningful time with others who get it at our GPS Hope and Healing Retreat in Sarasota, Florida. It's just a small group, just intimate time. It's wonderful. We know there will never be a time when we get over it. We talked about that, and our grief is behind us. But we can take intentional steps toward a greater measure of healing that will allow us to live life with hope and light and purpose again. And this is not in spite of our child's death, but because we want to find a way to live that honors his or her life. Like I said, we always keep it to a very small group. You'll be able to share your children with each other. We laugh together, we do cry together, and receive a measure of healing together, emotionally and spiritually. Rooms are already being booked. So if you're even slightly thinking about it, you should check it out soon. Go to gpshope.org/retreat. And also, don't forget about the Grief Cruise in October of 2027. This is a fantastic opportunity to have a week away that will refresh you, body, soul, and spirit. This is more than just a getaway. It's a space where you can take off your mask, be yourself, and not have to explain your grief. On days at sea, we'll gather for workshops along with time for reflection, shared stories, some quiet moments that offer connection and glimpses of hope in the midst of your personal journey. You'll also get to have fun exploring the ports of call and enjoying the entertainment and the amenities of the ship. It is hard to put into words how meaningful this week is. There are several who have been returning on each grief cruise for years. I hope you at least check it out by going to gpshope.org/cruise. Now, there will be a link to each of these things that I mentioned in the show notes, so you can just click on the ones that you're interested in to find out more. The Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast is a ministry of GPS Hope, walking alongside bereaved parents with biblical encouragement, practical resources, and hope. To learn more about our books, courses, retreats, and other resources, visit gpshope.org. If this podcast has encouraged you, would you consider supporting GPS Hope through our Patreon community? Memberships start at just $5 a month and help us continue reaching grieving parents around the world. Learn more at patreon.com/GPSHope. And now it's time for our birthday segment. Every week we share birthdays with each other of our children who have birthdays the week of that podcast. So this week, we have 3 birthdays to recognize that were sent in. Dominic Cardenas was born on June 28th and is forever 24. Lucas Christofferson was born on June 28th and is forever 19. Hannah Allie Robson was born on July 3rd and is forever 24. We celebrate the day these children came into the world and into the lives of these families. It will always be a day worth remembering and acknowledging. If you would like to have your child's birthday shared the week of his or her birthday, I would be honored to do that for you. Just go to gpshope.org/birthdays or click the link on the show notes. Fill out the form with the needed information, submit it, and I will share your child with the listeners the week of his or her birthday. Dave will also send you an email to remind you to listen that week. One day, you may look back and realize what I eventually realized. God had been doing much more than just helping you survive. He had been quietly transforming you all along. Not into the person you were before your child died, because that person no longer exists, but into someone who knows the faithfulness of God in a way that only comes from walking with Him through the deepest valley. And perhaps one day someone will look at you and notice something you don't even see yet. They may notice peace where there was once despair, hope where there was once hopelessness, a quiet strength that can only come from years of being held together by the Lord Himself. When that day comes, you'll know what it really is. It isn't because time healed your broken heart. It isn't because you love your child any less. It's because day by day, step by step, your faithful shepherd kept his promise. He walked with you through the valley. He steadied you along the way, and He never once let go of your hand. Until next time, remember to hold on. Pain eases. There is hope.